I'm no expert on this system, and Jen is out of town this morning. So we'll see what we can do and try to get you that. We'll also work on recording it so that it's available afterward. And you'll see that Iris has slides as well. So for this morning, I'm going to mostly point the camera at the slides, I think. Does that sound good to you? And but we'll also share the slideshow afterward for those who are here or those who are online. Welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Did everyone get a handout? Yes. If not, there's some over by the door. Okay. Hi, my name is Iris, as Nick said, and I had the opportunity to go to the U.S.-Mexico border with the ELCA Young Adult Mission Group. And so this is my presentation about what I experienced when I was there. I don't know how this works. Let me try this one. Okay. Oh, okay. All right. So I got a lot of questions before I went. Everyone was like, what is a border immersion trip? What are you going to be doing there? Who are you going with? Those types of questions. And honestly, before I left, I didn't know what I would experience there. I knew it would probably be emotional, but I didn't really realize the impact that would have on me and the people I was there with. And we had some really great discussions and we learned a lot. And it was very emotional. Coming back, it felt like culture shock in a way. I was feeling very overwhelmed by everything that I had learned and overwhelmed by the issue because it's so big. And part of what we talked about as a group was, what can we do? What can I do about this? Because this is an issue that's been going on for years, and immigration policy in the US has hardly changed at all. Very, no reform. And so, yeah, it was very interesting to have all these conversations and hear from the speakers that we heard from. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so I handed out a sheet of definitions because there's a lot of things to talk about, and so I'm just gonna try my best. There's a lot of terms, and like it can be kind of confusing. For me, it was confusing learning everything, so I'll do my best to answer questions and explain everything as best that I can. So some of the terms, Border Servant Corps, BSC, it's a nonprofit organization that works with Border Patrol. I'll talk more about it later. LIRS, some of you may have heard of, it stands for Lutheran Immigration Services. Amparo is accompanying migrant minors with protection, advocacy, representation, opportunities. I'll talk more about all of this, but Amparo is a program through the ELCA. DHS stands for Department of Homeland Security. CBP is Customs and Border Patrol. Annunciation House, also called A-House. ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union. Title 42, a public health measure put in place by the CDC to expel migrants directly at the border. And then Title 8 is the US asylum law that was in place before Title 42 came along. All right, and so this trip was made possible by a partnership between the Young Adults Ministry through the ELCA, LIRS, Lutheran Immigration Refugee Services, Amparo, accompanying migrant minors with protection, advocacy, representation, and opportunities, and then Border Servant Corps, which is the nonprofit organization that hosted us when we were down there. So this is our group. There were 15 participants, all young adults, so ages from 18 to 35. I met a lot of cool people along the way, people who had had different experiences abroad. I met someone who had done medical missions in El Salvador and had seen poverty and had worked with people who had been deported back from the US. There were two pastors that had just finished seminary, so that was exciting to hear their perspectives. One of them was an immigrant himself from somewhere in Mexico, so that was cool to hear his experience. There was a man who worked in immigration law, so that was cool to hear from his experience as well. And yeah, so this is our group. This is at the Women's Intercultural Center, the picture on the left. And then this is our group, like just talking in the house. And then over here, we went to a lookout and we were able to see the border between the US and Mexico. And I'll show more pictures in a little bit. Okay, so what is BSC? Border Servant Corps has two main purposes. The first one is it's a temporary hospitality home for migrants when they come across the border. So basically how it works is people come to the US, they seek asylum. Everyone who comes to the US on US soil has the right to seek asylum. This is international law. And when they get here, then they're processed by Border Patrol, which is supposed to be a very quick process, so it takes about 72 hours. They are processed by Border Patrol, and then they are sent to nonprofit organizations like Annunciation House, Border Servant Corps, where they have their hospitality center, and there they provide food, water, clothing, a place to stay, a shower, and people then are at those nonprofit organizations for like a week or less is the goal, and then they try and send them to family or friends that they have in the US while they wait for their asylum trial. But the issue with that, which we learned while we were at the border, is that these shelters are full, and a lot of these nonprofits don't have any more room to take in people. And so you may have heard in the news, people are being bused to other cities around the US. And if there's just no room, basically they just let these families and people out onto the streets, which puts them in a very vulnerable situation because they're coming to our border, fleeing violence and poverty, and to be let out onto the street. Here in the US, it's safer than in Mexico, but it's still, they don't have anywhere to go and they don't have money for resources. So yeah, it's a very, very sad reality that's going on right now. Oh, and then the other thing about Border Servant Corps is that it hosts groups, like the group that I went with. So really, mostly church organizations will go on these border immersion trips. They talked about other like school groups that will go. They have a volunteer house, so that's where we stayed. And then they create this whole program to so people can learn about the border and become immersed in the experience. So.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so a little more about the trip. Where did we stay? So we stayed at Border Servant Corps, the home for the volunteers, and this was in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And before we left, I wasn't really sure about, like, I heard we were going to be in Las Cruces, and then I heard we were going to be in Texas, so it was kind of confusing.
Did you say something?
But we stayed in Las Cruces.
Yeah, I sent you a note.
Yeah, baby, that's it. Yeah. Well, and their hospitality.
But I'm going to send Anna a note, tell her that we're watching on my phone.
And then we traveled an hour every day to go to
Okay.
El Paso. And we went to El Paso to hear different speakers, one of them being Border Patrol. And as you can see, El Paso is clearly on the border. It's a border town. And on the other side is Ciudad Juarez, which is in. Okay, so some of the organizations that we talked with, The first one we talked with was Annunciation House, which is a nonprofit organization that houses migrants that are documented and undocumented, and they seek to be the voice of justice and compassion for migrants coming across the border. The director of Annunciation House talked to us about like the role that we play in all of this, and told us how these policies, these migration policies are really created to protect us. It's an issue of national security, and they're put in place to protect us because the government sees a lot of these migrants coming as terrorists and criminals, as you have probably seen in the media, but that is a very bad portrayal of what is actually the reality. These people are coming, fleeing violence, poverty. There's a lot of gangs in Central America, and there's gangs here too, which is true, but it's not as bad as it is in Central America. So, let's see. Okay, and then the BSC Hospitality Center. So we had a tour of the Hospitality Center, and we didn't actually we didn't actually get to talk to any migrants that were there. We saw them, but we didn't get to talk to them just because they wanted us to respect their privacy, and a lot of them had gone through very traumatic experiences, and so to go and ask them their story and to relive that is, yeah, that's not why we were there. And so the Hospitality Center, it has rooms for people to stay. They showed us the shower. The shower facility is really nice. They had these bags of clothing and shoes and stuff that they would give to people immediately after they got off the bus. There was like a food center. They provided health services. I think what else. There's a playground for the kids. It was a nice place. It felt homey. So that was nice to see for people coming across and having faced these very traumatic experiences. Let's see. And we talked to Border Patrol, which was a very interesting conversation. To be honest, I didn't really know what to expect when we were talking to Border Patrol. And then to me, they appeared very friendly and nice. They kept telling us that they were a humanitarian organization, as they had pistols like in their belts and stuff. And they kept saying, I think they didn't want to take responsibility for a lot of the stuff going on at the border. They kept saying, we're not ICE, which is Immigrations and Customs. They say we don't do deportations. Essentially, they seem to kind of like be putting everything on ICE and not really taking responsibility for the role that they play in people coming across the border and how they treat people. Because as you may have heard on the news, Border Patrol is not, they've done some shady things that happen when they're processing people, and also like people at the border, they don't always treat them very well. And so the goal of Border Patrol is to process people within 72 hours. It's a process that's designed so people get out quickly. They come to the border, they're retrieved by Border Patrol, they're processed, and they go on to an organization like BSC or Annunciation House. But the thing is, this process is kind of backlogged, and it can get difficult. It can become difficult, and so sometimes people will end up in Border Patrol custody for longer than 72 hours, so like a week or more. And it's not designed that way because there's no showers. They have food, but not a lot. It's designed for a very quick process. So when people are stuck within Border Patrol custody, that's where you hear about like bad living conditions and people not being treated the best because they don't have access to showers, clothing, and they could be there for weeks. And then Border Patrol talked a lot about the cartels, which they're calling transnational criminal organizations, TCOs. And Border Patrol was basically, they were trying to tell us that they were like protecting people from the cartels, which I think is true, but Border Patrol has its own issues. Basically, they told us that the issue is that the cartels they're not as focused on like drugs coming across the border, which has been a thing in the past. Now they're more focused on like human smuggling. So people coming to the border are vulnerable populations, and cartels and coyotes will take advantage of those people and rape them if they're women, torture, kidnap, and hold people, and then demand money from their families back in their home countries. Border Patrol told us a story of the cartels would actually, so I'll show a picture of the border in a little bit, but the border wall is high, like it's very high, and the cartel will tell people, oh, climb up the border wall, and people will do it, and then they'll push them off on purpose so that other people can try and sneak through, or try and get Border Patrol's attention over to an incident that's happening so other people can try and get through and whatever. So it's very interesting, and it's a very complicated thing. And then the last thing I was going to say about Border Patrol is they just mentioned a lot of trial and error. They're like, you know, like, I'll talk about Title 42 in a little bit, but with Title 42 ending, people cannot be expelled directly at the border. They can come to the US and seek asylum. And with that happening, as you may have heard in the news, there's like thousands of migrants waiting across the border trying to come in to the US now that Title 42 is over. And basically Border Patrol, like, so we were there before Title 42 ended, and Border Patrol was telling us, we don't really know what's gonna happen when Title 42 ends. Like, we're not doing anything to prepare, which is very interesting because there's a big influx of people that they're expecting to come, and Border Patrol is not trying to organize or like obtain more resources. They told us that they have a 24-hour health services that like help people when people get across the border. Especially a lot of people coming from South America are crossing through an area called the Darien Gap, which is a lot of jungle and river, and it's very dangerous, and a lot of people come with wounds from that. And Border Patrol says they have 24-hour health services, but when Border Servant Corps and other organizations receive these people, a lot of them have wounds that have not been treated at all. I don't know how true it is about the health services there, but yeah, let's see. Talked about Border Patrol, and then Cristo del Rey Lutheran Church is a church organization in El Paso, Texas. They take in migrants as well. They provide food, clothing, a place to sleep for people. They also go across the border and visit shelters in Juarez, Mexico, and they help serve food and stuff like that. And the pastor was the one who talked to us about what he had seen and the people that he has worked with. And he told us stories of women that had come across the border and had been raped. One woman had been raped by every coyote or like smuggler that she had come into contact with. And she was coming to the border because her husband was in the US, and she said that she felt guilty, like it was her fault that had happened, and didn't feel like she was good enough for her husband anymore. So that was a very, very sad story to hear. Let's see, and then finally, the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU. We heard from a private investigator, and it was interesting because we heard from Border Patrol earlier in the morning, and then we heard from this man from ACLU. And a lot of the things that Border Patrol told us were not true and were contradicted in his presentation when he told us about migration. He basically talked about the asylum ban, which is coming into process right now with the Biden administration. I'll go into this a little more, but yeah, it was very interesting to hear from ACLU, and they do a lot of work just concerning migrants and making sure their voices are heard and their stories are heard. And then the last place we went was the Women's Intercultural Center. It's in I don't know if it's in Las Cruces. It's in New Mexico, and it's a center for women who, mostly migrants coming across the border. It has a variety of services. Most of them, I think, range from like teaching English classes to how to apply for citizenship. They have a clothing area so people can pick out clothes. They also provide food. Sometimes they'll try and like work with immigration lawyers, so then people have an immigration lawyer present at their asylum hearing. And so that was really cool because they had a lot of services, and they're run by all donations. So that was cool. The director, she talked about how since their organization is all run by donations and volunteers, they can help everybody. That's one thing about Border Servant Corps is it's a nonprofit, but they do get some government funding, and so Border Servant Corps can only help documented immigrants, which are people who have been processed by Border Patrol. But organizations like the Women's Intercultural Center is all based on donations, and so they can help undocumented and documented people coming across the border. And so as I mentioned before, these are some pictures from the border wall. As you can see, it's very tall. On the bottom right-hand corner, this is a picture of us talking with Border Patrol. Yeah, and so as you can see from these pictures, you can see right across the border to Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. It's right across. You could see everyday life, people like driving, people walking on the streets, and then there's this big wall separating us. So it was interesting to like stand there and see just like a cross, and there's this big wall just separating all of us. So, and then we went to this lookout point, and it's hard to see, but there's a big red X somewhere over there, and that's the border between the US and Mexico. So that's in the bottom left-hand picture. And again, so I'm sorry, I tried to take pictures and other people tried to take pictures, but pictures were like a sensitive thing, and there weren't always opportunities for us to take pictures, but I got a few. So this is in the top left-hand corner. It shows like these kids' bags that they make. So they have like toys that they give them, a sweatshirt, some other things that they put in for the kids, and then they also have bags for adults when they arrive, mostly clothing, shoes, shampoo, that kind of stuff. And then these are some toys, stuffed animals for the kids that come. The middle picture, it's kind of hard to see, but they have hijabs. So one thing they mentioned when we were there is there's a lot of Turkish migrants coming, and people who might identify as Muslim, and so we have hijabs. They had hijabs there to hand out to people that would need that. And then down here is Cristo del Rey Lutheran Church. It's a Lutheran church. Here's the pastor giving his presentation in the middle picture. And this is us just listening to the presentation. So. And then these are just like a variety of images that we took when we were there. I'll give you guys a chance to just look at those and interpret those however you want. But yeah, I thought the trash can was interesting. It says stolen land. The one on the right side, it says, "We as the Rocky Mountain Synod, ELCA, welcome all into the fullness of God's love. This welcome is inclusive of people of every race, national origin, immigration status, sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression, age, physical, or mental ability. Rather than using our differences to divide us, we pledge to use our differences as gifts for our work together." Okay, and so that is kind of a summary of what the trip was like and what I experienced. Now, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how this relates to everything that's going on in the news that you guys have probably been hearing, because it is confusing. Okay, so Title 42. Title 42 is a public health policy that was put into place by the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, and so it was able to override Title 8, which was the previous migration and asylum seeking policy. It was enacted by the Trump administration in March of 2020. And basically it gave the power for people, Border Patrol agents on the border, to directly expel migrants that came to seek asylum. And so basically that means they could just turn them away. So if someone came to the border and is seeking asylum, running away from violence or poverty, they didn't even get a chance to apply for asylum. And basically their voices weren't heard, they were just turned away directly. It was a tool to manage and deter illegal border crossings. As I said, it prevented migrants from requesting asylum once they reach US soil, and that is international law. Anyone is allowed to come to the US border, stand on American soil, and request asylum. And with Title 42 in place, people were not able to do that. They were turned back at the border. They were vulnerable targets to the cartels and smugglers that took advantage of them. And it was honestly really sad. And now, as you may have heard, there's many people who have been waiting in Mexico, waiting for Title 42 to end, hoping to come to the border and seek asylum. And so Title 42 expired on May 11th at 11:59 p.m. When the COVID-19 public health emergency ended. And basically, as you may have heard on the news, the government and people were expecting a large influx of people to come across the border, as many of them were waiting in Mexico. As you heard, probably I read this somewhere, that there's not as many people coming across as they expected originally, but there are still a lot of people coming across the border right now. Right, and then now that Title 42 has ended, what's happening? So basically, now that Title 42 is over, the Biden administration has decided to go back to the old policy, which is Title 8, and that means that people are able to come to the US and seek asylum, but Biden is planning to put in some policies and additional rules, so it's harder for people to seek asylum. All right, and then one of the things that he's trying to put into place is called the asylum ban. It has a focus on deterrence, and essentially, so I don't know if you guys have heard, there's this app, it's called CBP-1. It's an app that they've created to control the number of migrants coming across the border. So when people get to Mexico, they need to download the app, and that's an issue in its own thing. Not everyone has cell phones, or their cell phones have been stolen by the cartels. So not everyone has access to that. And then once they download the app, we've been told that it crashes very often because so many people are trying to use it. And then the other thing is that when you have the app, you're supposed to make an appointment, and then once you have an appointment, then you can be seen by Border Patrol and seek asylum, but because so many people are trying to use the app, it crashes. People can't get appointments in because so many people are trying to, and so their appointments are like months out. And the other thing is that it's discriminatory. The app itself discriminates. It's inherently biased against people who have darker skin, and so as you may have heard in the news, it has to like scan your face, and it won't always scan for people who have darker skin. It scans for people with lighter skin. So that is interesting. And okay. Let me see, sorry. And okay, as I already mentioned this, but the US is obligated under international law to respect the principle, it's called non-refoulement, that guarantees that no one should be returned to a country where they face the risk of torture and harm. And it's interesting because Biden campaigned against Title 42, which was a policy that expelled people right away and sent them into harm's way. And now Biden is creating this asylum ban, which is essentially very similar to Title 42. And the other thing with that is they're trying to create these like checkpoints. So when people are coming across, before people reach the US border, they need to check in Guatemala, Honduras, or Mexico. They need to check in there and try and seek asylum there first before they can come to the US. The issue with that is people are fleeing these countries, so it doesn't make any sense. There's a lot of corruption, and that basically it contradicts the whole idea of seeking asylum. Seeking asylum is coming to the US, being able to stand on US soil and ask for asylum. But by preventing these people from coming, they're trying to get them to, they have to seek asylum first in these other countries before they get to the US. So essentially they're preventing people from coming to the US, if that makes sense. Sorry, that was kind of confusing. And then there's a lot of things concerning this policy that Biden is working on. But another one is to increase penalties for people coming across the border. So basically under Title 8, they're gonna increase a $50 fine to $250, and instead of 6 months in prison, 2 years if you come across the border illegally. So that's interesting too. Okay, I'm almost done. Okay, and so I had some handouts that you guys have right now. Well, the first one, let me see. Why are they fleeing? That's just a little more about why people are coming to the border to seek asylum. Most of it has to do with the cartels, violence, poverty, and that's an issue in itself. I've done in college I did a lot of research on how the US has intervened a lot in Latin America, and it's just very interesting that the US has intervened and done a lot of damage and contributed to the corruption in Central and Latin America, and that's partially why people are coming to the border, because things have gotten so bad there. So in some sense, I think the US should take some more responsibility for that. So that's just my opinion. And then the last handout is Border Servant Corps. They gave us this handout, and they wanted us to talk to our congregations. So with all this going on, what can we do as a congregation and as people of faith? And there's multiple options. One thing we can do is donate to Border Servant Corps, so giving money. Another is to keep migrant families in our prayers and pray for them and pray for people at the border right now. Another option is sponsorship, so receiving a single asylum-seeking family or individual, housing them, providing essentials, giving them legal aid and community support. And then hospitality, receiving a bus of 50 asylum seekers that have been released from the custody of the Department of Homeland Security. Help them connect with their sponsors. Sponsors are basically family or friends that they have in the US, because that's ultimately the goal, to get people to find sponsors, people that they can stay with while they wait for their asylum hearing. Transport families to the nearest airport or bus station, and assist families with sponsors to find a safe place to go. I think the big thing here is just a lot of these people don't have family here and don't have a place to go. And that means they're stuck in shelters for months or years, or they're on the streets. I mean, as much as that is tried to be prevented, there's so many people coming and there's not enough room at the inn, as it says on the handout. So those are some things to consider. Okay, any questions? I know that was maybe a little confusing. I tried my best to explain everything, but go ahead.
Is the government of Mexico doing anything either to help or impede these immigrants or police the cartels at the border or anything?
So I was reading that Biden is working with the Mexican government, and they're trying to make more shelters, more space available for migrants that are trying to cross the border and for people that are there right now. I think they're trying to work with Mexico, as I mentioned, to create these checkpoints so people will come there first and try and seek asylum. And I think Mexico is working with the US as best they can to make that happen. But yeah, I think they are working together to at least create more shelters for people to stay. So. Any other questions? Go ahead.
I wonder, is there a local organization that a person or a group could approach for guidance and maybe guidance?
Mhm. That is a good question. I know there.
Should I start with a crack at it if you would like to pause?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, there's the Dane Sanctuary Coalition, of which we are a member. And just a few weeks ago, we held a coalition-wide meeting. It was online. And they gave us updates of what's happening here in Dane County and what the needs are. And so they have a website which you can access. We're members. We are going to get a recording of the coalition-wide meeting, and we may be presenting in that here too to keep you updated. There's other agencies in Dane County, and I'm just kind of learning about them all too. There's Centro Hispano, there's Silk, which provides legal services. The county has a department also run by Fabiola. So I think that probably the best way would be the Dane Sanctuary Coalition website to get updates and keep yourself informed. And our team here at MCC will try to keep you informed too. Somebody else want to?
I also volunteer at what's not called MOM anymore, if you guys have heard. It's called Way Forward Resources. They changed the name. I've been volunteering there on Wednesday nights, and there's been a significant increase in Hispanic populations and mostly migrants, I assume. Actually, when I was there the other night, there was a woman that had come from the Ukraine, and she had another woman there who was helping her like fill out the form and stuff. But yeah, that's another good place to volunteer. We need volunteers. And so, I mean, the pantry provides, there's a clothing center, there's a food pantry. They do a lot of good work there. And I think they're serving a large portion of the migrant population in Dane County, so.
Just want to remind people of both congregations that immigration is an issue all over the world. And my most recent encounter with it is sponsoring students from Haiti. And there is a policy put in place recently that would presumably allow for asylum of Haitians, Cubans, Hondurans, and Guatemalans. And one of the former students of mine asked if I would sponsor her to come to the United States. And I have done that, but it's an interminable process with lots of hoops and hurdles and difficulties. And the agency that handles this, United States Immigration and USCIS, just seems to be an interminable process. And I applied back in February, and there's been no action to date. They claim that they're processing it with due diligence, but there's been no action to date. So just want people to be aware that this is a worldwide issue at this point in time. And I think we're so focused on the US-Mexican border that we're not really paying attention to immigrants from other countries at this point in time, including Haiti and Cuba and so forth. And I think all of you are aware of what's happening in Haiti. There are gangs that have really taken over the country, and it's made for a very dangerous situation. the student I've been supporting, Medjina, is very concerned for her life and the life of her 3-year-old daughter. So the U.S. Customs and Immigration Service doesn't seem to care about that.
Yeah, there's one of the women on our trip actually is from Haiti. She had moved to the Dominican Republic. Yes. No, sorry, Chile. She had moved to Chile after the earthquake, and she's now in the US studying or working, I don't remember. But yeah, she had kind of shared with us her story and some of the stuff that she's been through. And then we also talked with Border Patrol, and they told us, like, for people who like were fleeing Haiti, a lot of them went over to Chile and other parts of South America, and then try and seek asylum in the US. But if they were deported or sent back, they'd be sent back to like the Dominican Republic. And so they, yeah, it's such a hard situation for people like that, and not able to go home right now with everything going on. So.
Two things. Number one, with the app, are there resources on the Mexican side that you know of for people that can't read or, work with technology?
Yeah, that's a good question. Most of the stuff we learned when I was on the trip was more about the stuff happening on this side. But my guess is probably not. I mean, they're already running out of people. Like, as you may have seen in the news, they sent part of the military down to help with the big influx of people coming through. They're out of people to like try and help with this issue. And so my guess is no, they don't. Yeah.
Do you know when they come across the border, are families sent one direction and then individuals sent in another direction so that there's more of a safety network for families as opposed to if you're just coming across individually or as a young couple?
Yeah, so they either, what they're telling us is they either see a lot of families, a lot of unaccompanied children, or individual men. And so all of them are processed by Border Patrol, and then the men are usually sent to ICE detention, and that's where they wait for their asylum hearing, and they can be there for a long time. And the children and the young kids are usually sent to nonprofit organizations where they can receive hospitality and stuff like that. They can be sent to, if they have family in the US, then they can be bused there, have a flight, go there to reunite with family. But a lot of the men who don't have family, they end up waiting in ICE detention centers. And as you may have heard, those centers have bad conditions. They're not treated well, and so people can be in there for months sometimes. Yeah.
Just a history on Title 42. The origin of it was in the late 19th century with when cholera was going all over the place, and they wanted to make sure that they could keep highly contagious communicable diseases. And then it during that, from then until 1966, it required an act of Congress to trigger it to say, okay, we're under those conditions. Mm-hmm. And then in 66, during Lyndon Johnson and Democrats, they said Congress is too slow, so they transferred it to the CDC. Mm-hmm. And so then when it actually got enacted in 2020, was sort of at a time when most of the world was all saying we all have to shut our borders until we sort of have what's going on. The Trump administration mm-hmm. probably recognized more than anybody that this could have an effect on immigration, but on the surface, mm-hmm. it was sort of consistent with what other people were doing. It then was sort of the dragging of the feet long after people said, well, basically, the United States has more COVID than anybody else. We should be bringing in people from other countries to lower our rate, and all that. So anyway, it sort of worked initially by having the ability to have a quick action and an executive just waking up one morning and saying, yep, this is what this title was for. So it still exists. It's just that they took down the 3-year period and all that.
Okay. Yeah.
Not that I can ever represent my husband, but he was in Juarez and El Paso earlier this last month, I guess. And one of the things that I know that the group that we've been working there on this Dignity Project has, one of the things that we did is sort of in response to support the English teaching to immigrant folks. We made an agreement with Scholastic, since our children's books went to Scholastic when we retired. And so we have this relationship with them. And so we've been sending books from Scholastic that are Spanish and English, joint, both languages, and each of the settlement houses, or whatever they call them, I think they had 20 some of them that they built bookcases for, and so those books are in there in circulation. So I know that that's one of the important things that people at the border in these many different nonprofits are doing, is using those and working on language with the kids especially, but within families as they come, so that the books are available. So that's one thing that I know about that's being done.
Thank you very much for the presentation. This is not a question for you, it's more for the general. I work with some people that listen to conservative radio, and when Title 42 happened this month, he came and he started spouting off, and I was just curious how people in this room, if you've had that conversation, how do you respond with compassion and empathy for the situation, and I don't know, without getting in an argument. If anybody has anything you want to talk to me after, it's one of those things that it presented the challenge of I kind of listened and I was like, I don't know what, all that is happening, and I don't want to sound dumb about it, but I want to come back with a good response.
Thank you, Iris. And as your uncle, I'm very proud of you. So thank you for doing it. So I just wanted to say one thing that and to your comment, I worked for the Extension Service for my career. We did an immigration summit, and we received hate mail for doing this in a church in Dodgeville, where we were packed to the hilt, and we had to have a sheriff accompany all the extension staff there that day. And outside the office was a van with big cardboard placards saying "go home," that type of stuff. So so I think there's two things here. So I call Senator Baldwin's office regularly, I call Senator Johnson's office regularly, and I will call after today and ask them to really think about good policy. I think we have to think that way. The second thing is, to try to reduce hate in this country is immensely problematic. And so your question is really a great one, and I think it's twofold. There's only two places that I know of in the world that have a wall, and we're one of them, which is shameful in my opinion. So I think all these things that you just brought forth today, and all the different agencies that are there, and your charisma for doing this, for one thing, should be applauded. And being a young lady from Luther College, from this community doing this, I really thank you very much for that.
We need to wrap so that we
Sorry.
can turn the room over.
I just have.
I want to give Iris a chance for any last words she has.
So Nick wanted me to share kind of like what inspired me to do this and what my next plans are. So I'm adopted from Guatemala. That's kind of where my story starts. Very passionate about serving people and accompanying people, specifically people of Latino background. I studied Spanish in college, and so I feel really connected to like my Hispanic heritage and my roots. And so, yeah, that's kind of where all this came from. And then also, starting June 28th, I am leaving for Honduras. I will be working with an organization. It's called Nuestros Pequeños Hermanos, which stands for Our Little Brothers and Sisters. It's an organization that basically is an orphanage for kids that don't have families or have severe disabilities that their families don't have the resources to take care of them. It's in a rural area, Rancho Santa Fe, I think it's called, outside the city of Tegucigalpa. I will be working at the One World Surgery Center that's right next to NPH. I will be a patient scheduler, coordinator. So I'll do that during the day, and then on the weekends, I'll spend time with the kids, tutor them, hang out with them, make connections. And so I'm really excited about that. And thank you for everyone who came and for the questions. If you have more questions, you can always reach out to me. I'm very open to sharing anything. And yeah, I hope this presentation was informative. I tried my best, but I'm still doing a lot of learning myself. I definitely need to do more research to really understand. It's such a complex topic. So yeah, thank you.
So again, for Iris doing getting accepted into the ELCA Young Adult Border Immersion Experience, two of the things that she was supposed to do afterward were share about the experience. So thank you for helping facilitate that. And then also to encourage support. So if you're not ready to have an asylum seeker move into your house, it's probably easiest to do donations. And so if you want to make checks to MCC, you can mark them BSC for getting to, I lost what BSC stands for.
Border Servant Corps.
Thank you. So there's a basket right here already for that if you want. Again, thank you, Iris.
Thank you. Yeah.